Well, thank you very much. I'll just begin by thanking the AAS for choosing me to give this lecture. I definitely don't feel I am the most distinguished anthropologist in Australia. I can even look here and find many who I feel deserve the title to be distinguished lecturer, whatever. But I'll try and do my best, of course. And I do feel slightly more petrified than usual. Not least because actually, I don't feel petrified at all because of this. It's kind of like my fantasy, you know. People sort of like, but I do feel the weight of the idea of an inaugural distinguished lecture. I feel a certain responsibility associated with it, which is more than the usual responsibilities that you have when you're going to give a lecture. And so I hope I'll live up to it all and make you at least think a bit with me in an inaugural and distinguished kind of way. My starting point is this old-fashioned quote by Stanley Diamond, who is a kind of known as a Marxist anthropologist, and he was the editor of and the inaugural editor of the journal Critique of Anthropology. This quote, even though it seems a bit old-fashioned today, I think, of course, the idea of resolution of the primitive civilized conflict is a bit of an old-fashioned Marxist sort of like disposition to always resolve conflicts. I think probably the psychoanalytic anthropologist in me would rather say that we need to learn to live with the ambivalence that is produced by the primitive civilized rather than resolve. And so this is my starting point. My starting point is how anthropology gives us a glimpse at another human possibility. And probably some people will think it unusual of me, but I'm actually going to be arguing not just that anthropology in general gives us a glimpse, or ought to give us a glimpse, but I want to argue that primitivist anthropology is central to anthropology. I want to argue, depending on what is your degree of sophistication and depending on your degree and willingness to be PC, you want to call it the savage slot anthropology, you want to call it primitivist anthropology, anthropology of pre-literate people, I will want to argue that there can be no anthropology without this anthropology. I am not going to say that this is the only anthropology that can be done. Of course, as you heard from Linda, anthropology today, and anyone who will define anthropology will tell you that anthropology started as a study of sort of like primitive, savage, whatever, tribal people, and then because of the colonial critique and the post-colonial critique and the postmodern critique and sort of like anthropology today is really, you can study all kinds of things, little groups like people who think the New South Wales Labour Party is very inspiring, big groups like followers of Obama, sort of like whatever. First, yes, I agree with this. I agree that anthropology, of course, and I am a practitioner of non-primitivist anthropology. But what I want to say to you is that there can be no anthropology if it is not in dialogue with this original primitivist anthropology. It has to touch it. It has to touch its ethos. It has to touch its sort of like politics. It has to be in dialogue with it. So I'm not trying to define what anthropology is in terms of area studies. I am trying to define it in terms of what it should be in touch with, its heart, if you like. And I want to be traditionalist and argue that it cannot work without this savage thought. Now, let me start by telling you and taking you to how I perceive today the place of what I will call the anthropological moment in the university. I can see a lot of sort of like people who are not in the university system here, and sort of like you read a lot about what the university system does or does not do to you. I want to start by saying that if you are doing a degree in the Faculty of Arts today, the first and most important thing that a critical art degree does to you is teach you how to take yourself outside of yourself. This ability of a tradition to take you outside of yourself is at the core of what we study at university. It's at the core of what we do. And I would like to say that there are different ways in which you are taken outside of yourself. There is the philosophical way. A philosopher takes you outside of yourself. In philosophy, you are taught to go outside of yourself in the sense of not stick to a specific perspective, not see things from one. There's many ways in which philosophy takes you outside of yourself, but I would say that would be one of the most distinctive ones. You learn to create, master, and apply techniques by trying to think outside perspectives. There's, of course, the sociological way of being taken outside of yourself. In sociology, you are taken outside of yourself because you are always trying to establish what are the social structures, what are the social forces that are outside of you and are shaping you. They are causal. There are, of course, the psychoanalytic. There's in general the psychological, but if we are talking about critical, we have to talk about the psychoanalytic. It takes you outside of yourself by looking at causal spaces where we are psychologically other to ourselves. And of course, there's the historical way of being taken outside of yourself by looking at how we are constituted historically. Now, notice I'm here after differentiations. I'm not trying to give an overall definition which captures everything. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how you can differentiate between the two. And the anthropological way of going outside of yourself. Now, it seems to me that there is something very distinctive about the way anthropology gets you to go outside of yourself. The most distinctive is that it is not causal. It is not causal. That is, it does not take you outside of yourself to say, how does what is outside of me constitute me, like sociology does, or history in the sense of continuity. Anthropology takes you outside of yourself simply by trying to tell you and remind you that you can be other than yourself. It's not about what causes you, it's simply this reminder, you can be other than yourself. let me just emphasize the point here that I'm not saying this is what anthropology is, this is what history is, this is what psychoanalysis is. If I'm an anthropologist, I could very much be a sociologically inclined anthropologist. I could very much be a philosophically inclined anthropologist. What I am saying is that I can be any of these. Indeed, if you are a sociologist, you can be an anthropologically inclined sociologist, you can be an anthropologically inclined philosopher, you can be a psychoanalytically inclined historian. We know this. What I'm saying, regardless of what we do, there's something distinctive in the tradition, a moment that is distinctive in the tradition, and that is what I'm saying you have to touch. Sure, we have hybridities. We all know about hybridities these days. And I'm a hybrid historian, psychoanalyst, anthropologist, etc. But somehow some people fail to see is that hybridity has an identity. If I'm a Lebanese Australian in Australia, that makes me an Australian Lebanese Australian. And I will be very different from a Lebanese Australian in Lebanon who will be a Lebanese Australian Lebanese. Hybridity has an identity. You don't escape identity just by playing out with the concept of hybridity. And likewise, when we are talking about disciplines, sure, we hybridize discipline and we are multidisciplinary, but multidisciplinarity still has an identity. And that's what I'm trying to say, that to the extent that anthropology exists across a multidisciplinary, as practiced in a multidisciplinary way, it still has a distinctive identity by being articulated to that moment of radical alterity. And now, what is then the anthropology of the study of radical alterity? Radical alterity, by the way, is the study of cultural worlds that are seriously different from ourselves. This is what the world is. And we know today that seriously different from ourselves, we know that just because you want to go to an island does not make you necessarily looking for something seriously different from yourself. We know that in this world we live in, it is no longer necessary even, nor is it guaranteed that radical alterity is far from you. You might go far and not find radical alterity. Radical alterity might be right where you are living. It might be exactly where you are researching. But what I'm saying is that you have to look for it and you have to study it if you are anthropologically inclined as part of what you do. You have to speak to that moment. You have to be able to desire to experience, know, and study radical alterity. You have to have the belief that radical alterity is knowable, that it's possible to know. And you have to have the belief that knowing radical alterity is hard social and emotional labor. You have to do that. And this basically is all encapsulated in what we will call we can be other than what we are. It is when you do this labor, this is a very tricky word, sentence, we can be other than what we are. We can be other than what we are because on one hand the we assumes the continuity and the other is breaking the continuity. We're saying that we are still the same, but we're still other than what we are. It involves sameness and difference. And this idea is also at the heart of the politics of anthropology. This is what Bourdieu defines as denaturalization. Bourdieu differentiates between, or rather says that the whole purpose of the social sciences from a political perspective is defatalization and denaturalization. That once you do social science, critical social science, your aim is to defatalize, that is, show that things can move in directions other than the directions they are currently taking. Bourdieu's idea is that the dominant try to fatalize. Dominant people and dominant interests fatalize their interests. They want to make you think that this is the only way. There's no other way. This is the only way you go. The social science defatalizes. It shows you, no, there are other ways you can go. The dominant are just trying to make things. Likewise, naturalization. Dominant interests naturalize the world. I try to make it. That's how we are. That's how we are. We like profit. That's how we are. You're a bit of a joke if you think sort of like we don't look after our self-interest. It's natural. It's natural. As soon as you hear someone telling you it's natural, you know there's something fishy going on. And this is the critical work that begins. So, what is this idea then? That we can be other than what we are. And that articulates the essential politics of anthropology. We can be other than what we are. This is a tautology here, but it's not. We can be other than what we are because we are always already other to ourselves. That is, when we say we can be other than what we are, it means that in us is more than can be seen. That there is an otherness in us that can take us and make us other than what we are. And so it is very important to think about this concept because it is about how totalizing a view you have of human relations, how totalizing a view you have of humanity. You say, you are this, but then you say, an anthropologist will always want to say, yes, but there's a bit more. There's a bit more to you than this. Anthropology, in a sense, the anthropological gaze becomes an anthropology for capturing excess. It is the same goes with social relations. Before that, anthropology as the art of negotiating between the culturally specific and universals. This idea, which is very common among anthropologists, this is truly sort of like political in its scope. You see, I have worked in the multicultural field for so long, and you get people who will say things like, these people are racist because they looked at me in the party, we were at this party, and they said to me, where are you from? They're racist. And then I would say, okay, if they didn't ask you where you're from, would you be happy? Would you one day come and say to me, look, these people, I went to this party and no one noticed that I'm Lebanese. That is, the people before us as the people do not want only their difference to be acknowledged. They want their commonality to be acknowledged. And it's not either or. They want both. And if you don't recognize my difference, I will hammer you on the head and tell you, racist, you didn't recognize my difference. And if you treat me as if I'm sort of like different, I will hammer you on the head and say, how dare you? That is, if you are another, you can be a serious pain. And you can attribute racism to anything that comes to you if you're so inclined. And the fact of the matter is that this is where there is a very important anthropological tradition. Anthropological tradition is the art of maneuvering between this universal and particular. It is about not dwelling in one or the other, because it is about knowing how to fluctuate, knowing how to circulate between the two. So here, again, this idea that I was talking about anthropology as the disposition to always allow for an analytical excess, a surplus of meaning that cannot be captured, which is also embodied in the idea of we can be other than what we are. That is, you know, I grew up in a school of power relation busting. This is how I grew up intellectually, that is. Dominant people hide their domination, and the object of social science is to show relations of domination where people like you to think that they don't exist. And you bust the power relations. Power relation busts through all. But in the absolutely sort of like energized attempt at capturing power relations, we started believing as if there was nothing other than power relations in the relations we were capturing. It is not to say that there was no power relations. It is not to say that the dominant hide power relations. It is not to say that it's not good when you capture power relations. What is bad is when you think you have captured the relation, because the relation is more than the power relation. The same, it goes for sexism, it goes for racism, sort of like the whole tradition of patriarchy will say, power relation. Yes, but then there must be something else. And I think same with racism, power relations. Yes. Does that mean that's all? When a powerful person who is white and a non-powerful person who is a migrant relate, is that all there is? A power relation? Maybe this power relation is very powerful, but still there is an excess. I think this is embodied in the sense that we can be other than what we are. We cannot be reduced to something as more. And I think this idea runs throughout ethnographic works, even when it's not explicit. It runs through very classical things like Marcel Maus's idea of the total, the gift as a total relation. It means it's multi-layered. You cannot capture it just by it being an economic. You cannot just capture it by being an economic and political. The gift exchange is not only economic, it's not only political, it's more, it's more, it's more. And you will find in most that there's always more. And this is the idea that there's always an excess. And that excess is political because it is the potential of what makes something potentially different in the future. So society, human relations, and individuals all have in them a potentiality to be more than what they are at any given moment. This is the idea embodied in this just simple sentence, we can be other than what we are, which is part of that core anthropological tradition. Why is this politically important today? I'm not just arguing that this is academically good. I'm saying two things. I'm saying it's politically good, and I'm also saying it is an idea which time has come, so to speak, or it's turn for it to shine in radical politics. I think if you look at 20th century radical politics, it was dominated by sociological and historical imagination. When you look at the history of Marxism, the search for the social conditions of change, social conditions, historical direction. The idea of revolution was that you ought to be somehow realist, and if you are a serious revolutionary, you have to have a serious analysis which allows you to move with the existing tendencies of your time. Otherwise, you would be called, as Marxists knew well, idealist, which means idealist means forget it. You are so disconnected in the Marxist tradition because you are not really basing your politics on the possibilities of the present. But this idea, you see, itself came from an era where people were somewhat optimistic about the possibilities that can come out of the present. Today we are living in a kind of like state of permanent impasse. Nobody believes in the dialectic that will resolve itself in some wonderful future. What there is impasse, certainly in my field, if I look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, if I look at the Western encounter with the Muslim world, if you look at the ecological crisis, there are impasse. They are not moved by utopias. Even ecological thinking is moved by dystopias rather than utopias.